Yeah, the fedora actually fits now. So
I'm resident follower for YouTube. Joel says it's my buddy Gordon Baskets, my buddy Catherine Gonzalez. We're here to review the Phoenix Arc from Dark Shadows. Diana Malay plays Laura Collins, the Phoenix, if you will. So, ladies first, what did you think of Diana Malay? Because the writers here are going off the Egyptian legend of the Phoenix, but obviously the legend doesn't include a person. But the
Mhm.
writers are going to imply, okay, the Phoenix is taking the form, or Laura is the Phoenix, if you will. What did you think of this here, this decision?
I think the writers were just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. I think that they had wanted to bring in David's mother somehow into the story, and that, obviously she had some sort of history with Bert Devlin and this kind of mysteriousness about her, and they just kind of threw in the whole Phoenix thing and the mysticism that kind of goes with it. And it's really interesting because she has these powers and they're not really explained, and you don't quite understand what her limitations are, what she can do, what she can't do. And so you're just kind of like along for the ride throughout this storyline, and like, what is she going to do next?
What did you think, man?
I think, yeah, the storyline, I can see where the writers are kind of, at this point they're figuring out, okay, they know that like if they throw a ghost at it, um, it'll get ratings. And I think it's interesting because I think the Laura storyline was kind of taken from Shadows on the Wall, which Art Wallace did. Um, I think that the execute, you can see what they're trying to go for because you can't really do, they're thinking, okay, we need to do something supernatural, but we can't really do like they can't go full vampire yet. So let's pull something from mythology. And I think I can see the effort and I can see where they're trying to reach to, but I think the execution is a little draggy because you're never quite sure. Like with Laura Murdoch, you don't even have a sense of her as like either a character or a supernatural creature. It's kind of like they're going, yeah, let's go with it. Let's have Diana Malay stare into the fire and we'll play spooky music behind her. But there's really no, I mean, the only real positive, well, one of the positive things I see in this storyline is that like Roger and David become less crappy to each other. I mean,
Yeah,
Roger Collins, to quote one of my favorite songs, he might be a father, but he's no dad. Um,
yeah.
but they're not, but at least it beats, the storyline beats out concerns about lost pens and bleeder valves.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, and when she debuts, I think it's episode 122. There's one in the next episode. She's talking to Maggie Evans. It's the first real interaction she has is with Maggie, with Kathleen Scott's character. So they're talking, and she asks Laura. She doesn't know that it's Laura. She asks her where you've been because Laura does say, "Yeah, I'm from around here." Uh, well, have you been in New York? Have you been? She goes, "I've been to Phoenix. I've been living in Arizona, and I lived in Phoenix, Arizona." So, and then Laura discusses the mythology of the Phoenix because she says, well, they took that name from the Phoenix, the myth of the Phoenix, the Egyptian mythology. And she explains what the mythology is, that every 100 years, the bird rises from its own ashes, it burns itself with its own wings and stuff. And it's like, okay, that's awesome. So the writers at least knew or had an understanding of what they like at least wanted to do there. There's also a lot of symbolism in this, like the first couple episodes. You'll notice when Laura's at the counter, she's smoking a cigarette, and watch the way they shoot. If you watch the way they shoot this, the smoke is almost looks like it's coming out of her, not from the cigarette. Which I think that's intentional. I think they're kind of hinting there's something about this
Mhm.
woman, quote air quotes. Um, and then the next episode, there's a couple episodes after this. It's right after because there's an interesting conversation between Roger and Sam Evans. They're at the Blue Whale. Sam calls Roger up, and Sam's getting drunk, and he goes, "Hey, Who's the one person who could ruin our lives?" And uh, say Roger looks at Sam, and Sam's like, Laura's back in town. She's come home. And Roger's not happy, and he tells Liz. So, what did you guys think of Sam? And because Sam's in cahoots with Roger about the whole manslaughter charge, what did you guys think of David Ford and uh, Lewis Edmonds' chemistry, Catherine?
I think that they are kind of like reluctant allies. They try to make it clear that like they don't want anything to do with each other, but they're constantly thrown together because of the situation where they have to figure out what are we going to do? What are we going to do? You know, and so they're really kind of forced to work together. And well, what do you know? Well, what do you know? You know, and you know, kind of work together that way, even though it's obvious that they don't want to be near each other, they don't want to work together, they don't even want to talk to each other.
Yeah,
What do
and yeah, and I wonder how much of that is like Sam Evans talking to Bob the bartender at the Blue Whale saying, put my drinks on Roger's tab, you know, um, but no, I think Roger, I think it is interesting because I think this is the first time, as we're starting to move into Dark Shadows as we know it, that kind of sense of the supernatural events that come to Collinsport don't just happen to the Collins family. They happen in the town. They happen all around them. And I mean, like, you do get, Frank Gardner and, um, Peter Guthrie, who I think if there were a Law and Order Collinsport, they would be the stars of the show. It would be, Sheriff Patterson will be like, I'm not going to deal with werewolves. I got like, you know, uh, uh, somebody robbed the local gas station, but Guthrie and Garson would be, Frank and Peter would be like, no, let's go investigate that. But back to Roger and Sam, you're talking about two people with very different, not just personalities, but they come from different social strata. Like, there's no reason for them. It makes me wonder, like, what's the backstory as to how they know each other? Because you wouldn't know each other necessarily. The only thing they might have in common is Maggie, but I can't see Roger going to the coffee shop where she works. I actually see him more like, going to the Blue Whale and saying, "Give me some brandy snifters because I need to crush them in my hand." But yeah, but I think it is a very interesting kind of lead into, okay, it's like things are so bad that these two people who barely like each other have to work together.
I think how they knew each other is Sam was known because there's a story Sam tells Victoria Winters. He's not from Collinsport. He's from Connecticut, I think is what he says. And when he's there, we don't know what his wife dies from, but I guess I would say it was an illness that cost him a lot of money for treatments or whatever. And he is being the local painter, town painter, he he gets to know the local people because Sam seems very sociable for the most part. And when he hears about the Collins family, he knows their names, but he doesn't necessarily socialize with them until after the manslaughter incident. Because he's walking. Because what we learned is he's walking up the road or whatever. standing somewhere, he witnesses it, and he never testifies to what he saw. That's why the jury convicts Burke Devlin. They do believe Roger Burke, um, which is crazy. But yeah, that's basically in a sense that Collinsport is a small town. It's not hard to like get to know people or run into people, or, which is odd. It's like, okay, I get it. It's a small town. Uh, so David Ford, who plays Sam Evans, is going to start painting Laura um, very quickly. I forgot how quickly the portrait starts to come, because he's literally like in a trance painting this. And Catherine Lee Scott, Maggie Evans's character, reminds him, "Hey, Pop, you were painting last night. You were just." He goes, "I was." Like he couldn't even remember it. And then when he goes to the portrait, he turns from it. He's like shocked that he painted something this shocking. What did you folks make of that, Catherine?
Well, we find out later that the reason he was kind of in that trance and compelled to paint this portrait was because of the ghost of Josette, who was trying to warn them. And she's looking after the family like she always does, and that was her medium of getting the point across as best she could. This is either what's going to happen or this is what you need to look out for. It was a warning. The painting, was a warning. And they didn't really realize that for a long time. They're just like, what is this weird painting? This is an ugly painting. This is a horrible painting. And everybody wanted to get rid of it, except David, who wanted it at first and was drawn to it. It's my mother. It's a painting of my mother. I want to have something of my mother. And his mother's like, you don't want that, that's hideous. But he was like, no, it's my mother. And that's kind of what he saw, because he had been separated from his mother. And you think, oh, okay, I could see that, where this little boy would want something of his own, that has his mother. And then when it starts glowing at night and everything, and then he gets scared of it, it's like, oh, okay. Maybe they were right trying to warn him away from this, but you don't really find out until later what the whole story is with that painting, why it came into being, why it's, glowing, and why it's causing people to, kind of be compelled by it.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other thing that's really shocking about the painting is that it's Laura in flames. I mean, it's not something you would, um, I think, um, I think the writers are trying to set up this sense of threat, and that there's something wrong with Laura. And I think, to me that I think is why Sam was the most shocked. Well, that, and he's, because I'm sure the whole painting overnight, he's, yes, Sam, I don't know if he has ever held a paintbrush while sober. I'm just going to put it out there. I don't think he's ever done that. And maybe he went to the Charles Delaware Tate School of Art. I don't know. It's not canon, but I think the idea that he's painting a portrait of a woman who he may have sort of known, because he's calling Roger. I think they're trying to, start build that sense of threat and tension. Um, I'm not sure, and I think for me, one of the things about this storyline is that, ooh, and well, I know I'm gonna get a lot of comments for saying this. From a Dark Shadows historical perspective, it is important because it's the first real supernatural, full-on storyline before Barnabas. I mean, it's basically one episode after, like 2 episodes after this ends, it kicks into the Jason McGuire storyline, and then it goes into Barnabas. I think in execution, I think many of the ideas that it presents end up being used to better effect in later storylines. I think overall it's an interesting storyline, but I think that, and it does things like using somebody painting and they don't know what, and the person's in flames. Um, so I think it's clever, but I also think overall, like it's I don't think it's I think because this was done at a time when the writers were desperate, because this was a if we don't improve the ratings, um, the show's off the air. And I think it kind of shows, but I also don't think we should necessarily punish it because they were in desperation mode.
Yeah. Mm. I think too, like, with this, they do so many great things with this. You're right. From an episode standpoint, it's the most supernatural, consistent storytelling. It's one
Right.
episode right after the other of Laura, and they're primarily focused on her. But the ghosts were here or there. Like you would see Bill Malloy's ghost in an episode, but then you wouldn't see it for well later on. I mean, sure, you could say it's around, but you wouldn't necessarily see it. Like the most you see the ghost is when Matthew Morgan is killed. This
Hmm.
is pre Barnabas, obviously, and he's killed in the old house. You see the widows from here, and you see, sorry, and you see, yeah, Matthew Morgan being scared to death by Bill Malloy and the widows, because Joseph comes to Vicky and says, "You're going to be okay," basically. Um, so here you have a supernatural entity disguised as a living, breathing person, because there's going to be a burned up body in Phoenix, Arizona,
Hmm.
that people are going to, so that's Laura. Look, there's Laura right there. Um, so, which is a lot of fun. And Gordon, you've touched upon this too, that they use a lot of noir elements in this.
Yeah, I mean um I mean it's kind of a I mean the storyline there's a lot of, the woman with a troubled past comes back to town. A lot of okay, there are secrets and motivations here. Um but I also think it's also a lot of very standard 1960s soap opera tropes, the woman with a troubled past who wants to prove she's a mother and nobody believes that she's a good mother. Um, and I think once we see her take David into the fishing shack and it's on fire, I think we get a pretty much a good sense of okay, yeah, she's probably not a good mom because you kind of really get the sense, and I think one of the elements that in looking at Laura in this storyline versus Laura in the 1897 storyline is that the Laura in 1897 has a lot more of a personality. And you get the sense that she's a person with a past who, and you could see where, okay, she ran off with Quentin. Maybe she died. The Phoenix took over. There you go. Here, I think usually with noir, um, the woman with a troubled past usually has a lot more of a personality. But since we kind of, but since we find that basically she is one of the undead, we're never quite like I was never quite sure who the real Laura is. And and I think this Laura is more of a she's more of an enigma because part of the mystery is okay, why is she back? Um, and what is she? Um, and I think noir usually you get a sense that maybe you don't know all the details, but you get a sense of who that person is. And I think with the storyline, just because of the nature of the storyline, I never got a sense of not only who this Laura is, but who the real Laura Collins is.
Mhm.
And I may be being a bit pedantic and maybe, a little too nitpicky about it. Um, but I do think there's a lot of noir tropes, but keep in mind a lot of noir they were still making noir films in the early 60s. the final episode when Vicky and Burke have the Phoenix conversation kind of reminded me of the scene at the end of Psycho where they do here's the explanation that you missed because you were busy watching the movie, and we're going to tell you what this all meant. And it's a great scene. I'm not complaining about it, but I think it does use some noir elements, but I think that would have been, I don't think it was necessarily intentional. I just think it was given the limitations of television at that time and what they could do. Of course they're going to go there.
Yeah. You've talked about how just that's just an idea, right? Well, with this, Laura, she's Laura in look and name and memory, but she's not Laura herself.
Right.
And I think that's the thing too, like because the writers are playing with a lot of things. Like they're not, yeah, they're somewhat using the myth of the Phoenix, but like I've said before, the myth of the Phoenix doesn't include a living, breathing person. So they're gonna take that and use that, and this you can kind of tell right away that Laura is not. It's not really Laura. They're basically hinting this is a supernatural creature disguised as David's mother, playing as David's mother. They whether no matter who the father is, whether it's Roger or Burke, whoever anyone believes it is, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who the father is. She's just after the child. um, so, and David's scared of her at first too. David almost goes off Widow's Hill. David actually backs away from her when he first, because Vicky sets up a meeting at near Widow's Hill. David backs away from her, almost falls off. Vicky saves his ass. Um, she does. What did you think of that, David? Because this is before he sees the portrait. David being scared of, well, Laura, Catherine.
Well, it's interesting because they talk about how Laura was sick and how she was in an institution. And so you kind of wonder, like, what does David remember about his mother that would have such a visceral reaction to this woman? Does he remember something that's scared him in the past? Or is he picking up that supernatural vibration? And that's just what's terrifying him, because somehow subconsciously he knows this is not his mother, that it's something else. We don't know.
Yeah. Gordon?
Yeah, and when you consider that by this point David he's seen the ghost of Josette, and Bill Malloy, like it's you could argue that okay, if Laura was always the Phoenix, that he's part supernatural creature. But I think what the writers are, I think the suggestion is that no, David has um Stephen King would later write about it as The Shining. Like we get the sense that um David has this kind of sense of, yeah, this is wrong. Because usually around this time when women were sent to, you know, when you when like a drama like this would talk about a woman being sent to an institution, usually, and I think they hinted at it at a couple of points, that usually it's um for alcoholism. And I think, and in looking at some of the dynamics, not just between Laura and Roger, but Laura, well, first, I think Roger's the kind of guy who I think he could drive any woman to drink. I think he could, um, and I think that, I think when she comes back, like you can really tell, it's funny because I think Roger at this point, they have that initial friction, but he later then says, I'll just give David to her because I don't think he wants to, I think the change we see in this storyline is that I think Roger comes to accept that, yeah, he's got a son and he's got to maybe not be kind of a dick to him. But I do think that David is maybe a little bit more sensitive to that kind of thing, where because later on he's going to see Sarah. He's going to, he's going to be visited by not one but two ghosts who say, "Hey, I want to hang out in this kid's head. I want to be, I want to spook this kid out." So I think, there's that sense of, David isn't just, he's not just kid stuck in the middle that nobody believes. Um, and that maybe part of why he was so troubled early on was that he was starting to pick the stuff up, but it wasn't like, oh, he's seeing Josette but can't talk about it. It's like, okay, there's something I'm getting a weird vibe here, and I can't say what it is. So that when he does start seeing the ghost of Bill Malloy and Josette, it makes sense that, oh, okay. To him, it's perfectly natural. To everyone else, it's kind of like, David, have you been have you been watching those Three Stooges on TV again? Have you been hitting yourself in the head or whatever? So I do think, David, we're starting to see that he's not just creepy little kid. Like, yeah, there might be something to this. And so when he's backing away from his mother, it could be just as much the things that Laura did to him as a child, as much as this ain't my mom. Who the hell are you? I'm backing off.
Mhm.
Yeah, because you're right. They do touch upon her going to a sanitarium for alcoholism. They talk about that in the Blue Whale. Sam Evans and Roger, and yet Sam Evans is having a
And
drink.
and 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 it's ironic that, you know, Roger and Sam Evans are talking about her going to a sanitarium for alcoholism. I mean, those two ain't teetotalers. I mean, I'm sure that I'm sure that if there's an AA meeting in Collinsport, there's at least one guy at the Blue Whale saying, "Yeah, Sam, Roger, come with me. You're being 12 stepped. You got a problem."
That's right. So Jen Bennett's character, Elizabeth Collins' daughter, she catches Diana Malay's Laura and Bert kissing at what was Matthew Morgan's cottage. They actually fix up the cottage to let Laura live in it, which is cool. They kind of change things around a little bit in there, make it look a lot nicer. The set looks actually refreshed really well. I love Cy Thomas off what he does here. So, first of all, a couple questions. What did you folks think of the set? That's number one. And number two, what what did you think of Elizabeth catching them in the act? And she's sort of because she's not the first necessarily. She's not a casualty because I got to get into David Ford's hand burning. Uh, but what did you both think of her going after Laura going after Elizabeth? Catherine?
Well, as far as the set, I think it's really interesting that they made the cottage look very homey, very welcoming, very warm. And I think especially the warmness, because, she's always got that fireplace going. She's always in front of the fire. And, we kind of think of a hearth and a fireplace and that sort of image as being very kind of warm and comforting. And here it's something terrifying because when she gets in front of that fireplace, you know, she's making people go crazy and forget things and all sorts of things. And so she's got this power. And so it's very interesting that here you have this very lovely kind of normal looking space, a very beautiful space that feels like it would be very comfortable and very homey. And inside there's this evil in it and an evil woman residing in it you know
Mhm.
so it's very interesting because with when Matthew Morgan left and here she is coming into this cottage, redoing it, new start, kind of thing. And you kind of realize like, hey, wait a minute, she's a baddie too. Matthew Morgan was a baddie, Laura's a baddie too, you know. And they talk about how one interesting thing with this storyline is the use of psychology and parapsychology. And I know Gordon and I have talked about like the stone tape theory before, and memories being locked into spaces and things like that. So it kind of makes you wonder about the space itself. All these things that have kind of gone on in the space. Does that contribute to people's actions, perhaps? Which is kind of an interesting thing to think about. And as far as her going after Elizabeth, I mean, that itself, there's a lot of like psychology to that too. I mean, Elizabeth has taken over as the mother figure for David. And here his actual mother is coming in and wants to take over, you know, and here she's got this way to kind of get Elizabeth out of the picture, not only because Elizabeth knows her secret, and I mean not her secret, but knows about the secret interaction with Burke, that has seen this kind of taboo thing, but it's like, okay, this is how I get my son back, is I get you out of the picture. I shut you up and I get my son back by getting you out of the picture. And I think that is kind of a very kind of feminine thing to do, especially if you're talking about like children, and she wants custody of David. She wants to own David. She wants to take David with her into the flames. And to do that, she has to have that control. And who's standing in the way of that control? Well, I think the biggest threat would be Elizabeth, really, as that matriarch figure.
Yeah, it also disrupts the whole system because it's like she can't really go after Roger because that's the most obvious. Um, she starts developing like little conflicts with Vicky and Carolyn, but they really don't have like they don't, within this system, they really don't have much power. Um, Burke, she can and Burke she can easily manipulate because he's not much of a threat. He's more of a and ironically, at the end of the Matthew Morgan storyline, he's actually more of a father to David than Roger is. But if you take a strike, even if Liz hadn't seen that, you strike Elizabeth Stoddard, you throw the whole family in disarray because this is a woman who's never been out of the house in over 18 years. And you've got, you now have people having to focus on Elizabeth because if she goes, then presumably Roger, no, actually, no. Carolyn, I think, would become like the lead of Collinwood. And you know, that's something where, you know, I think Laura would be sad, Laura, I think knows enough about the family where it's kind of like, okay, how do I warp all this and get this, who is the most obvious person I can eliminate and throw everything into disarray so I can kind of get my way. You go after Liz, and then as a result, you've got you, and what happens is you bring in Frank Gardner, who's handling some of the legal stuff, and he's handling Rogers and Laura's divorce, serving both. Not a good idea. Um, Collinsport Law School, bad choice. You also then have Peter Guthrie come in, who's kind of like the 1960s guy with a pipe, understands parapsychology, total masculine smoke show. Just putting that out there, you know. Very sexy-licious, as the kids say. Um, and I think what you've got is this interesting little, um, and I think that Elizabeth is kind of the most obvious target you would reach out. And I think what it also does is it starts to show, um, just from a storytelling perspective, that like nobody's safe. It's like, later on the show would say, "Oh, don't worry if you're fired. We'll help we hire you to play your ancestor." But here it's like, no, like Elizabeth Stoddard's on the table. She will get hurt. Roger is capable, and if she can get hurt, that means everyone else is, cannon fodder for Laura.
This is, and I don't know if anybody did this before Dark Shows, but this is something horror is going to do well after Dark Shadows because it reminds me of Drew Barrymore being killed off in the screen. Not that Liz is killed off, but she's kind of written out the show a little bit, where they put her in the hospital, like you're saying, and yeah, she catches Burke and Laura kissing, and she goes, "I'm glad I saw this," and Burke said, "I am too," because Burke is completely, for the most part, entrenched in Laura's sort of beauty, and if you will, she's seducing him. Later, it's going to sort of revert. Right, Vicky and Carolyn have no power. But what this does too, with sort of Joan taking a back seat a bit, is that this allows Nancy Barrett's character Carolyn to grow. Uh, it also allows Vicky's character to grow, like David's character to grow. Miss Edmonds gets a little screen time, and then you get to add more characters to the mix. So who do they add? They add Dr. Gufford. And Dr. Gufford, and it's Frank Gardner who suggests Gufford of all people.
Mhm.
Like, hey, I know this guy. And so, and he comes in very neutral. He doesn't pick a side. He doesn't say, oh, you have this going on. No, he investigates it. This is sort of the building block toward Dr. Julia Hoffman, you know,
Mhm.
well before there was a Julia Hoffman.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of, um there's a lot of ideas that you can easily see like coming to fruition later on. So like blonde woman with magical powers
Mm-hmm.
that channeled by fire,
Mm-hmm.
Angelique, the idea of the Phoenix story, giving power. There's hints of that in the dream curse where they say the same, it's the same like poem, but it has this power. And when you hear it in your dream, you're compelled to actually tell somebody else. Um, the carrot, Peter Guthrie is not only a proto Julia Hoffman, he's also a proto Professor Stokes. I mean, he comes from the whole occult, detective. Uh, you Shortly after Sherlock, kind of around the time of Sherlock Holmes, kind of late 1890s, early 1900s, there started to become, basically there were detectives who would investigate mysteries. Sometimes they'd have an occult, um, cause, and sometimes they would just be like mysteries that, okay, somebody dressed up like a ghost, but it, was completely rational. So I think it's continuing that. But you also have, I think, once by having Laura come in, I think this storyline, one of the things it does is it gives, as you said, Joel, it lets the Collins family become the characters that we get to meet when Barnabas comes in.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that I think, um, the writers learned, and I'm not sure how much planning there was in terms of, um, after this, once the Jason McGuire storyline comes in, and I think that might have also been, I'm probably wrong, but that might have been one of the initial ideas in Shadows on the Wall. They use him as a way to get to the Barnabas plot. Because then what you've got is, instead of this plot, which is basically Laura does weird stuff and everyone reacts, it's like you've got the family under siege, but then you've got this new random element where you now have, um, not only just conflict, but also it's, um, it's a sense of, okay, yeah, there are complications, and the writers can learn to write to those complications. So by the time you get to 1797, I mean, this is where I think the writers were starting to learn how to write Dark Shadows. So by the time you get to 1897, they're like, oh yeah, we got this. This is how you write Dark Shadows.
Well, that's the thing too, with all these characters that you see. Carolyn goes through so much. I mean, she's upset that her mother can't speak, that her mother has to go, because she's initially against moving her mother at first, but then she does. She's like, okay, I'll get my mom out of this house, and she gets to take over everything, like run the company, all that. Roger's is against all this, that he doesn't agree that Carolyn should be in charge. She's too young. So you have a bit of infighting too. You have a
Hmm.
lot of other stuff going on. The infighting between Roger and Carolyn. And what I really love about this, Victoria gets a little antagonistic in this,
Hmm.
and she kind of becomes Josette's sort of ally in all this too. She gives her hints. So she's sitting there next to Laura, and the police are there from Phoenix, the state police, and and she says something. They say died by fire, and Vicky repeats it sinisterly almost, and it's like, what's up with Vicky? It's like she's being antagonistic. It's because she is. And I love that. And I love how Josette is cueing her to go to the graveyard where we first meet the caretaker, who we're going to see later on with Barnabas, too. So, what did you both think of that? I'll ask this question, I'll be right back. But what did you both think of Josette picking Vicky to sort of help be her ally against Laura? Catherine?
Well, I think that this whole storyline is a storyline of finding voices. It's a storyline of the show kind of finding its voice and finding its way. It's a storyline of Josette finding a voice through Vicky. It's a storyline of Carolyn finding her voice because her mother has no voice. Uh, I mean that sort of thing. And with Josette, being able to express herself in this storyline more than anything prior, it's really interesting because like with the caretaker, the caretaker is giving a voice to the dead, the people in the cemetery, you know. And over in Collinwood, they're having their very first seance and literally letting the dead speak through them, you know. And of course, Josette doesn't speak in English, and it's kind of confusing, and it doesn't really give us that answer in that moment, you know. But she's doing the best that she can, the only way she knows how. She's trying to help the family the only way she knows how. Went through the painting and showing David to look in the drawing room when Dr. Guthrie is attacked and all the sort of thing. And Josette really, I think, finds her voice so much in this storyline and really becomes this kind of full character, not just, oh, it's just the ghost in the background. Josette really becomes this full character of the savior of the family and that sort of thing.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think too, it's in a way, it's almost like Josette is turning Vicky into like a real time Josette, where it's um where it's giving it's not just warning the family of danger. It's okay, there's someone who needs to be the um because after this storyline, Josette nopes out because
Mhm.
Barnabas is coming. And it almost kind of makes sense that, okay, if, kind of looking back, big picture in the overall story, if there's a sense that greater evil is coming and Josette, the ghost of Josette, is aware of it, what's the best thing she can do? Well, she can empower someone to be there because Josette knows, hey, look, there's a sense of if I stick around, I know what Barnabas is going to do. I can't help, I can't help the family. Like she can help the family with, you know, um, uh, an entity that has to be reborn every 100 years and in fire because
Mhm.
there's no personal stakes. And I understand it sounds kind of weird that I'm talking about a ghost with personal motivations, but bear with me. It's part of my charm. And but I think it's almost like she's saying, okay, Vic, here's somebody who um seems to actually have people's, Vicky at one point argues with Laura because she's like, hey, um, David's behind on his studies. He needs to do his homework. And she realizes that, most mothers would be super concerned. Laura's like, yeah, grades don't matter. Let me take the kid to a fishing shack. I don't care. Um, but I think, it's setting up Vicky as kind of the surrogate protector of the family. And that would be a role that, eventually later on, Barnabas has that kind of role of, he's not the villain, but he ain't exactly the hero either. He's like the guy who will do the bad thing if it means that the family's safe. Um, and I think in this instance, it's that kind of handing over the torch, as it were. And I think the writers also knew that, okay, at some point, if we're introducing a vampire, throwing a ghost in there is just going to get super confusing. Um, you know, and the only acknowledgement we have is episode 212. Barnabas gives the famous speech, um, I'm back home, why didn't you help me, Josette? Especially when it became something my father loathed. And I think that's the last time we have the sense of Josette as the protector of Collinwood. And but I also think it helps to serve as a bridge to, okay, this is kind of I'm handing it's like symbolically almost like the writers are saying, you know what? We can't do the shadows on the wall stuff. We have to move on. So it's kind of their way of saying, okay, the show changes because after the storyline, the characters that we're familiar with from Barnabas on take shape. And as you said, Joel, everybody has an arc.
Mhm.
Um, Carolyn becomes more mature, Vicky becomes more assertive.
Mhm.
Um, Roger is actually kind of accepting that he's a dad. David, I think, understands it like, yeah, a woman who wants me to come to her in a burning shack, probably not the best mom in the world. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, even Mrs. Johnson turns from being kind of Burke's little um, Burke's spy into the Mrs. Johnson we all know and love. And even Burke kind of becomes, um, I think he's less the antagonist against Roger and more just like the down-to-earth guy versus the entire Collins family. And
Mhm.
then when he's replaced by Anthony George, he becomes much more of a like secondary character. Not
Mhm.
a bad thing. It's just his role dramatically differs. So I think, yeah, this is where the writers figure out, okay, this is how we can write this. This is how we can do the supernatural. And I'm sure that it would be interesting to be in the band of parallel time where they didn't go straight from this to vampire, but they chose something else. I don't know what that something else is, but it'd be interesting to see if they had made a different choice, how that would worked out. But I'm great. I'm glad we got Barnabas because we've got, you know, the vampire. They did the smart thing to hire Jonathan Frid because he took the role in a direction that I don't even think they saw. But yeah, you kind of see where that kind of weird that dynamic becomes almost like, okay, we're setting this up to be Dark Shadows Phase 2.
Mhm. Can I give you a little theory I have with the writers, with Ron Sprout and the company?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That, and then this is just my opinion. I could be wrong. I don't think they knew exactly. I do agree. I don't think they knew where they wanted to take Barnabas, but I think they had an idea of an. I think, in my opinion, I think Dan had an idea of, okay, we can have this character on for a month and kill them all. And I think the writers thought, do we really want to do that? And sort of wrote around that to a degree.
Well, I think in Master of Dark Shadows, the documentary about Dan Curtis,
Yeah.
Malcolm Marmerstein, who's one of the writers from this arc through the
Hmm.
initial Barnabas arc, actually talked about that. Um, One of the things they were very conscious of when writing Barnabas was they wanted to avoid the usual vampire cliches.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think you're right, Jewel. I think Curtis might have said, "Oh, just throw a vampire in it." And they said, no, we'll make him a reluctant vampire. We'll also avoid like the usual, like vampires were part of the public consciousness. Everybody knew what a vampire was, so they kind of said, okay, yeah, let's work around it. Because Marmerstein, even in one sequence, said, we told Dan not to hire Bela Lugosi. We wanted like a handsome blonde guy. So who
Mm-hmm.
did they hire? Bela Lugosi. No, they didn't. They hired a classically trained Shakespearean actor who took the role and said, you know what? And even Frid in interviews had said, okay, that he pulled his inspiration from Barnabas was two Shakespearean characters, Richard III and Caliban. And these were characters who had an ugliness about them.
Hmm.
You know, Richard III was a hunchback and Caliban was kind of like this weird beast man type, but there's a kind of sense of humanity and a sense of like wanting to, there's something about them that he thought Barnabas had. Um, and I think one of the key lessons, I think, from the Phoenix storyline was okay, um, if we give our supernatural character, a personality, because a lot of times Laura in this arc for me is a cipher because she is kind of this creature who may either be Laura Murdoch in a weird, Laura Collins in a weird kind of reincarnated phase or something else. Whereas Barnabas had a personality, Angelique had a personality. You get to 1897, that Laura Collins had a very definite personality. She was a lot more, I think she's a lot, um, I think she is a lot stronger in 1897 than in this arc. And if any of you out there would like to fight me on it, more than happy to. Also, reminder, like, share, and subscribe, leave comments, have the kids over, brew them a pot of coffee, have a family watch party.
Absolutely. Well, here's the next question. So I kind of skipped over this. So David Ford's Seb Evans, he paints the picture, the portrait of Laura the Phoenix, and for his troubles, he gets his hand set on fire by Laura herself. What did you think of that, Catherine?
I thought it was a great war tactic. You know, Sam is her enemy. She's gonna hit him where it hurts. He can't continue the painting if he can't use his hands, you know? And so yeah, that was a great kind of tactic. I mean, he didn't die, which I mean, I don't know if that was exactly what she was going for. I know that she just wanted to stop him,
Mhm.
but I think that that was kind of wonderful that he's an artist. He uses his hands and he's creating this portrait, and now he can't paint because his hands are burned.
Yeah, and I think too, they're trying to establish that Laura, fire has, it's like Laura's element, she's able to use it somehow. And I think trying to stop him, this is, um, Laura doesn't seem to be like a long time planner and plotter with a grand scheme. She's basically doing it on the fly. So, yeah, burning his hand might be one tactic. Like in another content, she might like, she understands, okay, hey, alcohol is flammable. Maybe that little bottle of brandy that Roger keeps hidden for a special occasion, maybe that can just go up in a quick puff of smoke. Who knows?
Yeah, in parallel time, I guarantee you, Maggie Evans comes home and the cottage isn't the shack is in flames, and it's like pop, pop, no pop no more. Uh, that would be crazy too. That'd be awesome. I just think the fire effects are so cool in the Phoenix arc. I have like two favorite fire sequences in my whole life: Dark Shadows and Halloween 2. Because I just love it. Uh, it's so cool how they use the effect of it, and I love the shack being lit on fire with David inside, Vicky trying to save him. It's so cool. We're not going to see Diana Malay until 1897. But what did you think of Dr. Peter Guthrie, Catherine?
He was a very interesting character, you know,
Mhm.
and and I know I've talked about this before with you, but he's one of those helper characters that it's like, you know, yeah, he could have solved this and he could have done this, but then he died, you know, like with Madame Finley and Julianka and these other characters, you know, and I think that if he had, you know, stuck around, he would have fulfilled the Professor Stokes role. However, I think that there was a very good reason that they couldn't have him to kind of stick around beforehand, because I think he would have sussed out Barnabas immediately, you know, with his knowledge of the occult and all that sort of thing. So it works with that, even though I'm sure that the writers didn't intend that. You know,
Mhm.
it does work that he wasn't in the picture when Barnabas shows up. Therefore, Barnabas was able to kind of carry out his plans and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think the other thing by not having by killing off Dr. Guthrie is that the trope would have been he's the expert, he would have made it to wherever he is. Here's the big explanation, it gets solved.
Mhm.
You kill him. And this is close to the end of the arc. It's like, okay, you've just added a complication because okay, how's this going to end? Um,
Mhm.
and again, I think that's one of the really key lessons that Dark Shadows that the writers learned. I mean, Jewel, you've said it on this show. Dark Shadows is a show that always took chances.
Mhm.
Um, and I think also too, I think one my suspicion with the Barnabas storyline is that one of the big influences on that, if I have no evidence other than a few assumptions, would have been the novel I Am Legend by Richard Matheson,
Mhm.
because it takes a very scientific, it's a horror novel, but there's one key sequence, and it reminds me of a sequence with Dr. Hoffman that in the novel, I think I think the character's name is Robert Neville, because he has different names in the different adaptations, but he's sussing out okay. He knows they're vampires because of this plague, and he comes up with he figures out the scientific rationalizations. So like, um, okay, why do they avoid sunlight? Well, they avoid sunlight because um, the sun changes one kind of bacteria to another, and it causes them to disintegrate. Um, why are they why do they avoid garlic? Well, there's a thing in the garlic that they're super sensitive to. And then it's the why don't they see themselves in the mirror? Because science would say, hey, mirrors always work. Well, it's psychological. They know that there's something wrong with them. And psychologically, they can't see themselves because they're just so, they know that there's It's serious, but then with the Barnabas storyline, Julia's talking about the cells and the injections. I mean, it's not, it's, it's sciency enough, but I do think that had you had Dr. Guthrie, he's more of the kind of the, um, because he's a parapsychologist, he's speaking on things that are too abstract that you cannot necessarily determine through
Mhm.
science. I mean, there's no blood test to determine whether you're a phoenix or not, or whether you're a werewolf or not.
Yeah, that's the thing too. Like the writers did such a great job of. I agree with you because you can't blood test if you're a Phoenix. So they do blood work on Barnabas. They do, and after Julia Hoffman, you have Dr. Eric Lang step in a bit.
Hmm.
With Guthrie's death is so huge because it adds that level of unpredictability.
Hmm.
It okay, how are they ending this now? Because their biggest one of their biggest allies out that isn't a ghost is dead. And how do they end it? Up in flames, literally. And
Hmm.
bravo, because the Dark Shadows writers, no matter who it is, do this again and again and again. I don't mean the flames. I mean, they never tip their hat of how they're going to end something. And they do a damn good job of this. All 1,125 episodes, even in the locked room with Bramwell and I think it's what Laura Parker's character,
Catherine.
Catherine. Yeah, great job. They do this every time. They never tip their hat, and I applaud the hell out of it because it's for sure. I've gone back and watched it a ton of times. It's like I'm still blown away by what they do with their ending because they never tip it to this is predictable.
Hmm. Yeah, and that takes skill because
Mm-hmm.
when you're dealing with, I mean, they were cribbing from Gothic, a lot of literature, and
Mm-hmm.
um, it is very easy to sometimes tip your hat unknowingly because you're kind of thinking you're being res quote unquote respectful to the source material. Um, or it's like now with other kind of shows, it's like they don't stick to canon. Um, but I mean, the great thing about Dark Shadows that I love is that there's not a lot of canon to it. Like we don't, and there's nice little gaps for potential storytelling. Like we don't know what happened in 1947 in Collinsport,
Mm-hmm.
but the show could have done a 1947 flashback.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know the history of, um, we don't know a lot of the history before the founding of Collinsport. We don't know much about things until about 1690 when some guy named Judah Zachary was put on trial.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that when you're not worried about canon, you can take huge creative leaps. And I've seen favorite shows, and I'm sure there are people who can guess the two that I'm thinking of, where you get so mired in the, hey, let's bring this thing back that you lose that element of surprise. I mean, even Dark Shadows, even though 1840 is um some of the setup is and the some of the setup and some of the ideas are cribbed straight from 1897. It is a completely different approach and a completely different set of stakes, and it never feels like, oh, we've been through this again. It's willing to, and it's very much punk rock television because they knew with 1840 they were at the end. So it's like, it's kind of the same spirit that drove different writers, but it drove this storyline, which is what the hell? Um, we got nothing to lose. we know, we may end up losing anyway, so let's just kick out the jams and get this done. I'm surprised that, they didn't get too crazy and like say like, that Sam Hall and Gordon Russell were like, you know what? All the male characters should not wear pants. Let's make all our episodes pants optional.
Like this podcast. Anyway.
Well, I will say that I am in bed right now,
there
so
you go.
if you want to guess whether I'm wearing pants or not,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
on
there
you.
you go. There you go. I have one final question for you, but so let's do a hypothetical. Let's say Dark Shadows would have never ended. Where would you have liked to see them go? What would have been the next storyline that you both would have liked to see? Catherine?
Well, with this storyline, again, as I said at the beginning, there's so many unanswered questions. So if they did revisit the storyline, or if, in future they do like a reboot or something, a great thing would be to get more into what exactly is the Phoenix. What is that mythology? Because again, the 1897 mythology to the Phoenix was so much more interesting and intriguing and really lent depth to the character. But it's like there's got to be more. It's like is this character one being? Was there an actual Laura that died and then this thing took over? They should get into that. Figure out, exactly what they're doing with Laura Murdoch and the Phoenix and all of these untold stories of Collinsport. Because if Laura's, every 100 years and has been in this town for so many hundreds of years, what else happened?
Or
Let's see, where would I take the Phoenix storyline? What I would have probably done, because I know there was some talk about bringing the Phoenix back, eh, you know, presumably after the 1840 storyline. I would have not only added to the mythology, but if you look at the timeline and the way when it was modified in 1897, it's like, okay, you had a 1790s Laura that married Jeremiah, in 1890s that, um, got involved with Edward. So why is she showing up 30 years early? And what I would like to, the idea that I would want to explore is that maybe this creature, um, part of, not only developing mythology, but maybe this creature understands it like, oh, wait, this cycle is a shortening. That means I'm going to die for good. And especially since we get a sense that the last, you know, 1790s, 1890s, she didn't take her kids with her. And there's something, because that didn't happen, and because it keeps happening, it's like, okay, she's on a one last ditch to move forward. And I would probably, if we're doing it, whenever we're doing it, have her as a new, you know, if it's in the 70s, I'd still have Dinah Malay play her, but I would also have it as, someone who is adjacent to a side character that comes in. And then have a lot of doing the whole, wait, you know, have that kind of memory of, yeah, she kind of looks like Laura, but is she really? And have Dinah Malay play it a lot differently than either the first time or the second time, but have that element of she knows like her time's running out because if she somehow managed to get um a mulligan and she's going to, if she doesn't do it this time, it's not just, oh, she comes back in 100 years. It's she doesn't come back at all. Like, that's it. Because I think that really raises the stakes. Um, and what it also does is it gives, and you could even say like, okay, yeah, um, she had a spell that allowed her to come back in this new form. But I think giving her a little bit more of a, instead of a putting off the problem for 100 years, and really kind of make her almost like an existential threat to the Collins family. And I'm not sure how that would play out, but that it's more than just, okay, this is this thing that comes in and disrupts their lives, but like, yeah, this is about survival. This is her last chance. Um, and if, it's either going to be her or the Collins family, it can't be both.
Yeah. What I would like to see, have seen if they would have done this again, is in 1970, you see this woman that is Dinah White sitting in the sanitarium, and a nurse comes in to check on her. It's not Wincliffe, it's someone else. And she sets the nurse and the whole sanitarium on fire, gets out, and comes back, comes out after. And kind of do a bit of a flashback. What did happen in Alexandria in 1897? Other than it got set on fire, that's something I would like to see with it. Would have liked to see with that. But is there anything you both want to add before we go?
Nope.
Nope.
I want to thank you both for joining me. This was a lot of fun. Link to Gordon Dabowski's Amazon page and website is going to be in the description box. You can get Gordon and Catherine Gonzalez on Facebook. Hit them up. They're huge Dark Shadows fans. If you got any pulp questions or Doctor Who questions, ask Gordon. He will answer you. I promise you.
Yeah.
He's the man. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.
Bye,
Good
Joe.
night.